In this video, I'm going to cover an interesting way that you can model a cartoonish rock out of a simple sphere and a displace deformer. So what I like to do when I'm building different elements is sometimes I like to break out into a fresh project and just build that element, copy, and then paste it into our original project file. And how Cinema 4D works allows for this workflow pretty easily. So if I want to create a new project, I'm going to go and just click on this little tab option here, just like a web browser, and this will open up a brand new project file. Now, I always recommend you go ahead and then save that project as, and then you can name it whatever you want. So I'm just going to name rocks because this will be the file that I'll be creating some rocks with. And you can see how you can easily just toggle through and tab through each of your project files. So you can have multiple projects open at once, which is really, really cool. So let's go ahead and start out by creating a sphere. And let's up the segments here because we're going to use some displacement. So we know that if we need to displace a piece of geometry, we need to have some bit of geometry here. And again, I'm going to go ahead and use a hexahedron type of sphere as well. So got a lot of segments to allow for some really nice smooth deformation. Let's get back to our garage shading with outlines by hitting N and then A. And let's go ahead and with that sphere selected, I'm going to go into my deformers menu, which we are getting very familiar with in this series so far, and go down to displacer. And again, I'm going to hold the shift key down to make that deformer a child of that selected sphere object. So first thing, let's just crank up the height a little bit, and then let's go into the shading tab, and let's again load up some noise. So we've done this before to create the ripples on the sand. And if we click on this noise tab here to go into our noise settings, you can see we have that global scale, and we also have all of these noise types. Now there's a lot there, and a lot of these might not make sense to you at all, but there's this handy little menu here where if you click on it, you can actually see a nice visualization, a little icon of what those noise types look like. Now, the noise type that we are going to use to create a cartoonish rock is actually this Voronoi 1. So I'm going to choose that. And right away, this does not look anything like a rock. But part of the fun of Cinema 4D is just experimenting and playing around with things. So let's just really up the scale here. And let's call this like an even 2000 because I like my even numbers. And you can see that this already kind of looks like a cartoonish rock. We got these weird dimples in there though. And how you can kind of tease those out is by adjusting the relative scale. So this is the scale in the X, the Y, and the Z. Okay, so you can adjust the scale options here and kind of shape this rock. Okay, so this is, kind of looking okay. Let's maybe adjust the seed and kind of experiment around here. Maybe bring the global scale down. Let's bring down that relative scale in the Y. And let's click out of there because sometimes when you're navigating around, you can accidentally hit the 3 key and add a 3 to, say, the relative scale here. So I'm going to click out of that slider and then navigate around here. You can see, again, we got this weird dimple. Let's adjust some of the settings here. Adjust the seed. Ooh, that's a really nice seed right there. So we're just basically changing the random seed that's generating the noise. I'm going to click out of that option there, rotate around. This is, we got that little dimple there, but this is looking really nice, say from this angle. Maybe we could just rotate this back and voila, if this is placed on the sand, we'll never see that weird little dimple. Now this is looking really cool. But one other thing we can do is layer up multiple displacers and maybe add even more fine detail to this rock. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this displacer the Voronoi displacer, and I'm going to command or control click and drag, and I'm going to duplicate that, and already you can see that, that looks kind of interesting. Let's go back into that noise shader for this second displacer and maybe adjust the scale, maybe adjust the seed. And like, this is the fun of Cinema 4D is you just kind of can mess around and play with the seeds and experiment with what is going on here. Maybe go into that second displacer and adjust the height and kind of see what result that you get. Now what we can do on this second displacers, maybe we go into the noise and we just use some plain old noise, okay? And maybe we adjust the scale here, adjust the seed. So you can see this is just adding a little bit of undulation here. And if I go and click on the displacer, go back into the object tab here, I can adjust the height here and maybe give this like a little negative height. And let me click out of that. Let's kind of orbit around here and we can even see what that looks like on or off. Let's go back into the shading and say adjust the seed here. Maybe adjust the scale a little bit. Again, I'm going to click out of that field and just kind of orbit around here. I'd say this is looking pretty nice. Then we can also go back into the Voronoi because everything is procedural and we can adjust the scale here and do whatever we want, okay? Now let's go ahead and rename this displacer to just displacer noise for now, to distinguish which displacer is doing what. We can even see what this looks like the other way around, if adding that noise after looks any good or not. So a lot of things to play around with. Now I'm actually liking this, okay? I think we got a good rock result, but the problem is that if I hit N and B, we have a lot of polygons here. It's pretty dense. And for something that we're gonna ultimately shrink down pretty small, we don't really want this kind of high density type of mesh for this, because the more dense the mesh in your viewport and the more of those dense meshes you have in your scene, you can kind of bog down your computer. So when you can, you should definitely lower your polygon count. Now we could go into our sphere and remove some of the segments, but you're seeing we're removing a lot of that detail. If I hit N and then A, you can see that we're removing detail and we're also getting kind of chunky. So we need to, maintain a pretty high segment to get those sharp little ridges there. But luckily there's another way to take and try to maintain the fidelity of a highly subdivided mesh and convert it to a lower poly mesh by using something called a remesher. So if we go to our generator menu here and go to remesh, now this is a generator object, and remember how generators work is you need to feed in an object that you want to have that generator act upon by making that object a child. So we're going to make this sphere object a child of the remesh. And if I hit NB, we'll actually see all of those edges and polygons in that view. You can see that by default, you can see that this just updated. And really, the density of our mesh is pretty much the same. And that's because if you go into the object tab of your remesher, you can see the mesh density is set at 100%. So we still have the same mesh density that we did before. But if we brought this all the way down to 2, you can see we're at like 2% of our original mesh density. Now you'll also see that we lost a lot of the detail. So let's actually up this to say 20. And you'll quickly see the unremeshed and the remeshed version there. And you can already see that we have a lot less polygons if I just hit the Q key to toggle on and off that remesher. And you can see that we're basically maintaining a lot of that fidelity. Let's go NA to go back to garage shading with lines and toggle the Q key. And you can see that, we're getting a little bit of fuzzy edges here, but again, we're going to shrink this down ultimately. But you can always play with that mesh density amount and find out what density you want. Now you can also have some smooth iterations in here as well, and the remesher will try to do a good job of smoothing out those perhaps chunky edges that we once had, and this is looking really nice. So the one thing to know about generators, primitives, and deformers is that they're always calculating in your scene, and while we just have a single object in here with just a couple of displacers and just a single remesher, if we had a lot of these objects in our scene, we would have a lot of things calculating. So whenever you can, it's important to bake out your geometry into just a polygon object. So basically you can think of this as if you had a After Effects layer with a ton of effects on it, and when you ran preview, it's running through all those effects. Now say if you pre-rendered all of those effects and that animation and rendered it out into footage, that footage would play much faster because it has all those effects and everything baked down. This is a very similar concept, okay? So what I'm gonna do to bake this all down is I'm going to select the topmost parent of all the objects I want to bake down, and I'm gonna right click, and I'm gonna go to Current State to Object. And when I do that, it's gonna bake everything down. You can see here's our remesh null, and underneath it we have this sphere remesh. Let's double click that and name this rock 01 because we'll make multiple rocks here. And let's select this null and go to Object, Delete Without Children, just to delete that null. And you can see here is our baked down rock. Awesome. So what we can now do is treat this as almost a rock generator. So let's go into, say, this displacer Voronoi. Let's go into that noise and let's just start toggling through these seeds and see when we get another nice looking rock. We can also adjust the scale here as well. I think that is looking pretty nice. So I'll just click on the remesh, right click, and again, go to current state to object. And again, I'll go and select that null and go to delete without children, and we'll name this rock 2. Now we got another rock over here in our rock pile, and we can do this as many times as we want to get as many rock types as we want as well. So that's looking nice. Let's right click on that remesh, current state to object, delete without children, rock 03. So we can do this as many times as we want, but once you're done making your rocks, just select all the rocks that you want to copy and bring over into your original project file with the crab, and just hit Control or Command C, and then we're just going to tab over to our original project file and hit Command or Control V, and voila, we just pasted our rocks into our original scene there. Now we just got to hide that little dimple there, but this is looking really, really nice. And that's one of the cool things about Cinema 4D is you can just simply copy and paste objects between project files very easily. And this is something that you really can't do in a lot of apps. You'd either have to save out multiple files and import those files into a single project and all that kind of stuff. Now, we'll worry about placing these rocks later because we're going to make a few more elements to populate our scene, and then we'll place them inside of the fishbowl. But basically what I want you to take away from this is never doubt the flexibility of many of the tools inside of Cinema 4D, especially when you start stacking deformers and generators together. Part of the fun of Cinema 4D is how it allows for experimentation. Just throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks can be a lot of fun.